I never thought the neighborhood I had chosen for peace and privacy would turn into a battlefield of petty control, backroom deals, and power-hungry board members. When I first bought my property out here on the outskirts of town, the biggest selling point for me was the winding gravel road that led to my driveway, a road that had been in my family for generations. My grandfather had carved that road out with his own hands and an old bulldozer back in the 50s, cutting through the trees and laying down the first rough stone base so that his truck wouldn't sink into mud every time it rained. It wasn't a public road, and it sure as hell didn't belong to the neighborhood association. It was mine, my family's. It led to my land and my land alone. For decades, we maintained it ourselves, pouring gravel, patching dips, trimming back the trees so that it stayed wide enough for trucks and trailers. When I bought the property from my father, I knew that road was more than just a stretch of rock and dirt. It was a symbol of independence, of heritage, of the idea that we didn't have to answer to anyone else when it came to what was ours. But then the HOA came along. They had been creeping closer over the years, expanding their borders like some empire hungry for more power, buying up parcels of land and convincing new residents to sign onto their rules. At first, they kept their distance from me. They didn't like the fact that my property sat just outside their carefully drawn lines, and they certainly didn't like the fact that I refused to attend their meetings or pay their dues. But they couldn't touch me. Not legally, not with the documents I had to prove ownership of my land and the road that ran into it. Still, I noticed the looks they gave me whenever I drove past their manicured lawns and pastel-colored houses. I saw the way their president, a smug man named Douglas Pratt, always made a point of waving at me like he owned the world. I didn't wave back. I didn't have to. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a letter, not certified mail, not a legal notice, just a smug little envelope tucked into my mailbox with the HOA's logo at the top. Inside was a notice that the road leading to my property would now be considered part of the community thoroughfare and subject to rules and regulations of the association. They claimed it was for the betterment of the neighborhood and to ensure safe access for all residents. My jaw clenched as I read it. That road wasn't theirs to claim. It wasn't even on their map. But there was in black and white, the HOA declaring ownership of something they had no right to. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash, thinking it was nothing more than another bluff. A week later, I found the first sign they weren't bluffing. Bright, shiny new signs appeared at the entrance of the road. HOA Access Road, residents and guests only. They had the nerve to bolt their sign into ground right next to the weathered wooden post my grandfather had placed there decades ago. My blood boiled when I saw it. Not only had they declared my private road as theirs, but they were already branding it, marking like a dog lifting its leg to claim territory. That night, I took a wrench and unbolted the sign, tossing it into the back of my truck. I thought that would send them a message, but I underestimated just how deep their arrogance ran. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. When I stepped outside, I saw a crew spreading fresh gravel over the road, their dump trucks blocking my driveway. Men in reflective vests worked like it was just another job, and standing among them was Douglas Pratt himself, arms folded, chest puffed out like he was a general of some conquering army. I stormed down the driveway and demanded to know what the hell they thought they were doing. Pratt smiled, his teeth shining in the sunlight, and said, "Improving our road." He had the audacity to say that word, our. I wanted to drag him off my land right then and there, but I knew that would only end with cops on my doorstep. So instead, I called out over the sound of the machinery, "That's my road and you're trespassing." Pratt just smirked and handed me another envelope. "Not anymore," he said. "It's part of the community now. You'll thank us when property values go up." Then he turned his back to me like I was nothing more than background noise, like he didn't just steal a piece of my life. The rage that burned in my chest that day could have lit the entire county on fire. I retreated to my house, slammed the door, and read the papers he had given me. They were full of jargon and citations of laws, none of which applied to my land. I called my lawyer, who confirmed what I already knew. Legally, the HOA didn't have a leg to stand on, but the problem wasn't legality. The problem was power. They had money, influence, and a tight-knit circle of residents who would follow Pratt's word like gospel. I, on the other hand, was just one man. But I was a man with patience, with a long memory, and with the kind of quiet anger that doesn't fade. It sharpens. Over the next few weeks, they tightened their grip. More signs appeared. Rules were posted online about speed limits and guest registration for anyone using the road. They even sent me a notice of violation for supposedly improper road maintenance. Imagine that. The same people who had trespassed onto my land were now fining me for not keeping their road up to their standards. I ignored every notice, every warning, every smug letter that came my way. I watched from my porch as neighbors began using the road freely, waving as if it belonged to them. I clenched my fists every time I saw another car roll by, their tires grinding into the gravel that my family had poured over decades. The breaking point came when I returned home one evening to find my driveway blocked. Not by construction equipment this time, but by an SUV parked sideways across the entrance, its hazard lights blinking. I laid on the horn, expecting someone to move, but no one came. Finally, I got out and saw a bright orange ticket tucked under my windshield wiper. It was a violation notice from the HOA. Apparently, I had parked improperly on their road the night before, which was impossible because I hadn't even left the house. It was the most blatant fabrication yet, and it was clear what they were doing. They were trying to force me into submission, to make me so miserable that I'd either sell my property or bow down to their authority. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the crumpled notices spread out before me. The overhead light hummed, and outside, I could hear the occasional crunch of tires on gravel. Cars belonging to people who now thought my road was theirs. I felt something inside me harden, a quiet resolve settling in. They wanted war? Fine. I'd give them a war they'd never forget. But unlike them, I didn't need committees, rules, or votes. I had something far more powerful, a mind that could plan, patience to wait for the perfect moment, and a lifetime of knowing every inch of that road better than anyone else. They had taken what was mine without asking. So I decided I'd take something from them in return, something that would feel deep in their bones. Their cars. Every last one of them. Once the decision settled in my mind, it felt like a weight had been lifted. For weeks I'd been angry, pacing around the house, replaying every smug word Pratt had said, every violation slip they'd slid into my mailbox. But when I decided that I was going to vanish every one of their cars, the anger transformed into something sharper, cleaner, purpose. They thought they had me cornered, but they didn't realize they had just given me the motivation to act. And once I set my mind to something, I finished it. Always had, always would. My father used to say, "Son, you can't fight a swarm of hornets head on, but you can smoke them out of their nest and they'll scatter." That was exactly what I was going to do. Smoke them out by hitting them where it hurt most, in the pride they took in their shiny new cars. Planning was half the battle. I didn't rush. I started by watching, studying, and noting everything down. These people were predictable, creatures of routine. Pratt drove a black Mercedes SUV that he washed every Saturday morning until the chrome sparkled. His wife had a white Lexus coupe. She took out mostly in the afternoons, always to the same cafe in town. The vice president of the HOA, a woman named Janice, had a massive Range Rover that barely fit in her driveway. She used it like a trophy, showing off the luxury whenever she drove to meetings. Then there was a parade of minivans and sedans from other members, school runs, grocery trips, little league drop-offs. Every one of those cars represented something to them. Status, wealth, control. Without them, they'd feel stripped bare. I began by walking the road at odd hours. Early mornings before sunrise, late nights when the neighborhood was quiet. I memorized where the streetlights cast shadows, which driveways had cameras pointed toward the road, and which families left their garage doors open too long. I noticed which cars stayed parked overnight, and which ones disappeared at dawn. I wasn't just looking for targets. I was building a map in my head, a living blueprint of their daily movements. The HOA had turned my road into their lifeline, and I was going to turn that lifeline into a trap. The first step was preparation. I knew if I went in sloppy, they'd catch on, and the whole plan would collapse. So I started small. One evening, I walked down to the edge of Pratt's property and scattered a handful of roofing nails across the pavement near his driveway. The next morning, sure enough, I saw his SUV pulled over, the rear tire flat, his hands on his hips as he barked into his phone. He didn't see me watching from the tree lean, and I didn't stick around long enough to be noticed. That little test run wasn't about damage. It was about timing. I needed to see how long it took for a tow truck to arrive, how Pratt reacted, how the neighbors responded. It told me everything I needed to know. They weren't prepared for sabotage. They didn't expect anyone to push back. With that knowledge, I escalated. My property backed up to a service road most of them didn't know existed. A narrow gravel lane my grandfather had once used to haul lumber, with a little clearing. I realized I could use it to come and go unseen, slipping behind their houses without ever touching the main street. That was the artery of my plan, an invisible path that let me move like a ghost while they slept. I fixed up the old ATV in my shed, muffled the exhaust, and fitted it with a small trailer. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough to tow a vehicle if I disabled it properly. The first rail hit came on a Wednesday night. I chose Janice's Range Rover because it was loud, obvious, and she bragged about it every chance she got. She parked it half in her driveway and half in the road, like she wanted everyone to see it. That arrogance made her an easy mark. I waited until after midnight, when the neighborhood was dark and silent, except for the crickets. Dressed in black, I rode the ATV down the service road, cut through the tree line, and crept toward the SUV. I had prepared a homemade device that could silently deflate all 4 tires in less than 2 minutes. Once the Range Rover sagged onto its rims, I hitched it up to the trailer and dragged it, inch by inch, back through the woods. The whole time, my heart pounded like a drum in my ears, but there was no turning back. By the time the first streaks of dawn touched the horizon, the Range Rover was hidden deep in an abandoned barn on the far side of my property. The barn had been falling apart for years, but it was good enough to conceal a car. When Janice stepped outside that morning and found her precious SUV gone, the scream she let out echoed through the neighborhood. I heard it clear as day from my porch, and I sipped my coffee with a calmness I hadn't felt in weeks. That scream was the sound of the balance shifting. Of course, the HOA called the police. They swarmed the street, asking questions, knocking on doors. Pratt strutted around like he was the sheriff of the town, demanding answers. But no one saw a thing. No cameras caught me. No tracks were visible on the paved road. And since my property was off limits to their search without a warrant, the barn remained untouched. The officers left empty-handed, shrugging as if maybe the car had been towed by mistake. Janice ranted and raved, but there was no proof of anything. And that was just the beginning. I didn't stop with one. Over the next 2 weeks, I took them one by one. A Honda Odyssey, a Ford Explorer, a shiny Tesla Model Y. Each vanished into night, relocated into hidden corners of my land that only I knew how to access. Some I stashed in the barn. Others I parked deep in the woods under camouflage tarps. I even sank one in the old pond out back, watching the headlights flicker and fade as the murky water swallowed it whole. Every time a car disappeared, panic rippled through the HOA like a virus. At first, they thought it was random theft, bad luck. But after the 5th car, suspicion turned inward. They started blaming each other, whispering that maybe someone on the board was behind it. I could see the cracks forming. Their unity was crumbling. The beauty of it was that I never had to rush. They had made the mistake of thinking I was just one man with no options. They underestimated what a determined man can do with knowledge of the land and nothing left to lose. Each disappearance fed my resolve. Every time I watched Pratt's face twist with frustration as another resident screamed about their missing vehicle, I felt a satisfaction that words can't describe. They had stolen my road. I was stealing their sense of control, their pride, their comfort. Without their cars, they were stranded, reduced to walking the same road they had claimed without asking. By the time the 10th car was gone, the HOA was in chaos. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Fines and notices stopped coming to my mailbox altogether because they were too busy trying to save themselves. Pratt's smug smile had vanished, replaced with tight-lipped scowl and deep bags under his eyes. He tried hiring private security to patrol the neighborhood at night, but they were clueless, focusing on the paved streets while I slipped silently through the woods. They couldn't guard against a ghost. And that was exactly what I had become, an invisible force reminding them that actions have consequences. What they never realized was that I wasn't just taking their cars for revenge. I was sending them a message, one they couldn't ignore. By the 3rd week, the neighborhood had turned into something unrecognizable. What was once a smug, tight-knit community of rule followers had descended into paranoia and suspicion. You could see in the way they looked at one another, how they locked their doors twice at night, how they clutched their phones when stepping outside. The HOA board, once so full of arrogance and power, now held emergency meetings in Pratt's garage, whispering like children telling ghost stories around a campfire. They thought they were in control of everything, but I had reminded them of a truth they couldn't stomach. Control is an illusion, and I wasn't done yet. From my porch, I watched them scramble. Residents were hitching rides with each other because half the community had no transportation left. Mothers marched their kids down the road with backpacks slung over shoulders, glaring at every tree as if it might be hiding a thief. Delivery trucks stopped coming altogether after too many complaints about unsafe conditions in the neighborhood. The HOA had created their own cage, and I had locked the door behind them. Still, the best part was how Pratt struggled to keep his empire from collapsing. He stomped around in that polished Mercedes SUV of his, the only vehicle he still had left, barking orders, filing reports, demanding answers from the police who by now were tired of showing up with no leads. His voice grew louder every day, but his authority shrank with every empty driveway. I never once got sloppy. That was the key. Each disappearance was carried out with the same patience, the same precision. I only struck when the timing was perfect, when the street was silent, when I knew which cameras were facing where, when the shadows hid me like a blanket. I moved like the night itself, and they couldn't keep up. The funny thing was, the more I vanished their cars, the more they pointed fingers at each other. Janice accused the treasurer of staging it to make her look weak. Another board member swore Pratt himself was behind it to boost his grip on the community. They called in private investigators, who charged them thousands of dollars only to shrug after a week of watching empty streets. Every layer of protection they added only made them look more foolish when the next car vanished anyway. I still remember the night I took Pratt's Lexus, the one his wife adored. It was parked neatly in their driveway, gleaming under security lights he'd paid a fortune to install. I slipped through the woods, cut the power to the floodlights of the breaker box, and within minutes the house was as dark as a cave. I could hear a dog barking inside, but it never came out. The Lexus rolled silently as I pulled it backward with the ATV, inch by inch until it disappeared under the tree cover. By dawn, it was parked behind an old grain silo half a mile from my house. When Pratt's wife came outside in her silk robe, shrieking into her phone, I leaned against my porch railing with a cup of coffee and smiled. That morning, Pratt drove away in a Mercedes with his wife screaming beside him, and for the first time, he didn't wave at anyone. His kingdom was falling, and he knew it, but I wasn't blind to the risks. I knew that every move I made tightened the noose around me if I slipped. If they ever caught me in the act, it wouldn't be just angry neighbors. It would be jail, lawsuits, maybe worse. So I doubled down on discipline. I kept journals with every detail, every schedule, every observation. I buried them in a waterproof container out back, just in case. I built fake trails in the woods to throw off anyone who thought to follow tire tracks. I even went so far as to plant false evidence in dumpsters around town, shards of broken glass, fake car parts. So if anyone found them, they'd think the vehicles were being chopped up by professionals. The more confusion I sowed, the less chance anyone would connect the dots back to me. Meanwhile, life on my property grew strangely peaceful. For the first time in months, I could walk down the road without seeing smug smiles or hearing engines tearing over gravel I had maintained with my own hands. Their absence was my victory. My road sounded like it used to, just the crunch of my boots, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl. Every car that vanished was like clearing another weed from a garden. Slowly, piece by piece, I was restoring what they had stolen. The paranoia in the HOA reached its peak when they brought in a special meeting with the sheriff himself. I stood at the edge of my porch and listened to their voices echo down the road as residents demanded curfews, patrols, even the installation of gates to keep outsiders away. I nearly laughed out loud at that. Outsiders. They still couldn't accept the truth, that it wasn't outsiders tearing them apart. It was me, the neighbor they had underestimated, the man they tried to push out. Pratt shouted about restoring order, about reclaiming community strength. But I could hear the cracks in his voice. He was desperate, clinging to authority that was slipping through his fingers. Then came the night everything changed. I hadn't planned to hit Pratt's Mercedes yet. Part of me wanted to save it for last, the crown jewel of my revenge. But fate has a way of making decisions for you. That evening, a storm rolled in, thunder shaking the windows, rain coming down in sheets. Most of the neighborhood huddled inside, lights flickering as the power strained. But I noticed through my binoculars that Pratt had parked the Mercedes at the edge of the road, probably too lazy to pull it into the garage during the downpour. My blood ran hot. It was as if the opportunity had been gift-wrapped for me. I pulled on my rain gear, mounted the ATV, and rolled to the storm like a shadow swallowed by darkness. The rain muffled every sound, covered every track. By the time I reached the Mercedes, my heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might echo louder than the thunder. I slipped the hitch under the frame, checked the straps twice, and began pulling it backward into the trees. The storm roared overhead, lightning illuminating the branches around me. It felt like the earth itself wanted this car gone, wanting to finish what I had started. Dragging that beast of a machine through the mud nearly broke the ATV. But inch by inch, I hauled it down the service road until it was out of sight. By dawn, it sat next to the others in the barn, rainwater dripping from its roof. When the storm cleared and the sun rose, Pratt's howl carried across the neighborhood. I could almost picture him standing in his driveway, fists shaking at the sky like some fallen king robbed of his crown. And in that moment, I knew the war was over. I had taken everything that gave them power, and they had nothing left to fight me with. For the first time in months, I slept soundly that night, not because the battle was done, but because I knew I had proven my point. The HOA thought they could steal my road without asking, thought they could bend me with threats and violations. Instead, I had bent them, broken them, and left them crawling in the dirt they once claimed to own. And I wasn't sorry, not one damn bit. By the time Pratt's Mercedes vanished into my barn, the HOA was nothing but a shadow of itself. The community that once strutted around like a private kingdom now looked more like a battlefield after the war. Lawns went unmowed, flower beds wilted, fences lean crooked. People stopped waving at each other, stopped gossiping on sidewalks. Instead, they bolted their doors, peeked from behind blinds, and whispered about the curse that had fallen on their neighborhood. That's what some of them had started calling it. A curse. They couldn't fathom the truth, couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that one man, the very man they had mocked and ignored, was dismantling their world piece by piece. What struck me most was how quiet the road became. For years, I'd hated the sound of their cars chewing up the gravel, their laughter carrying from rolled-down windows as if my property was a highway for their convenience. Now all I heard was silence, my boots on the stones, the whistle of wind through the trees, the crunch of deer moving through the brush. It was the kind of silence my grandfather must have felt when he first cut the road, before anyone else thought they had a claim to it. It belonged to me again, and that silence was proof. Still, victory never comes without cost. The sheriff's office had grown tired of the constant calls, but Pratt refused to let it go. He stormed into town hall, filed complaints, demanded the state step in. Rumors spread that he was trying to convince the county to annex the road officially, to use legal muscle to make it theirs for real this time. But those things take time, and time was what I had in abundance. I didn't fear courts or paperwork. I had already shown them that pieces of paper meant nothing if a man was determined enough. And I was very damn determined. Neighbors started fleeing. Within a month, 3 families packed their houses and moved out, selling to anyone who'd take the properties at a fraction of their worth. The HOA that once bragged about rising property values now found themselves with cratering prices, empty homes, and a reputation so toxic that even the most desperate buyers hesitated. The sight of moving trucks rolling down my road was sweeter than any paycheck I'd ever earned. It was justice playing out in real time. They had tried to erase my ownership with signatures and meetings, and I had erased their power with silence and missing steel. Pratt, though, refused to bend. He strutted through the neighborhood like a king without a throne, puffing his chest, snarling at anyone who doubted him. He kept calling emergency board meetings, though half his board was gone. He drove borrowed cars, always looking over his shoulder, snapping at his wife when she asked too many questions. I could see the weight crushing him, the cracks spreading through his carefully polished mask. And I savored it. I wanted him to feel every ounce of what he had tried to dump on me. I wanted him broken, not just beaten. But here's the thing about men like Pratt. They don't quit until they're humiliated in public. And that chance came sooner than I expected. One crisp autumn morning, I woke to the sound of raised voices down the road. I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee and saw flashing lights, police cruisers, a tow truck, and a crowd of residents gathering in Pratt's driveway. His wife stood on the porch, shouting at officers. Pratt himself paced the yard like a caged animal, his hands waving wildly. Word spread fast. The bank had repossessed his home. All those years of HOA dues, fines, and control hadn't saved him from drowning in debt. His arrogance, his obsession with dominance, had finally crushed him. I watched with cold satisfaction as the sheriff himself handed Pratt papers, while movers began carrying furniture out of his mansion. Neighbors whispered, some smirking, others shaking their heads. Without his cars, without his house, Pratt was just another man with nothing. And for the first time, he looked around as if realizing the empire he'd tried to build was gone, brick by brick, tire by tire. He caught sight of me then. Across the road, coffee in hand, calm as a stone. Our eyes locked. For a long moment, he said nothing. His face turned red. His lips quivered like he wanted to scream. But no sound came. Deep down, he knew. He didn't have proof, no camera footage, no witness testimony. But his gut told him the truth. The man he tried to erase had erased him instead. I didn't need to gloat, didn't need to shout. My silence was enough. After that day, the HOA collapsed. Without Pratt, without cars, without authority, the board disbanded. The signs they had nailed into the ground rusted and fell. The road went back to being what it always was, mine. No one dared challenge me anymore. No one tried to find me, tow me, or ticket me. If anything, they avoided me, walking quickly past, eyes fixed on the ground. I had become the ghost of their nightmares, the reminder that pushing a man too far will make him push back harder than they can handle. And here's the part that still makes me laugh. I never brought back their cars. Some people thought maybe they'd been stolen by a professional ring and shipped out of state. Others whispered they'd been stripped for parts. The truth was simpler. Some rusted under tarps deep in my woods. Some sat like trophies in the barn, dust coating their windshields. One still rests at the bottom of my pond, a grave marker for their arrogance. Every time I walk by, I smile. They'll never find them, and I'll never tell. Because those cars aren't just machines, they're symbols. Symbols of how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. Looking back, do I regret it? Not for a second. They wrote the first strike when they took my road without asking. They believed their rules and committees made them untouchable. But rules mean nothing when you face a man with patience, land, and the will to fight back. They learned that the hard way. And I learned something too, that peace doesn't come from compromise with bullies. It comes from standing firm, from reminding them that a man's land is his, and no piece of paper or smug meeting can change that. The road is quiet again now, just as it should be, just as it was always meant to be. The neighborhood never truly recovered after Pratt's fall. You'd think another eager resident might have stepped up, tried to rebuild the HOA from the ashes, but none of them had the stomach for it anymore. The fear lingered in their eyes long after Pratt's moving truck rumbled down my road for the last time. They'd passed by each other on the sidewalks, but the friendly waves were gone. The block parties disappeared. The manicured perfection of their lawns began to slip. Weeds creeping in where once they boasted about their curb appeal. Without cars to flaunt, without fines to issue, without meetings to puff up their chests, they were just ordinary people living in ordinary houses. And for the first time since I had moved here, I could breathe. That road, the one my grandfather carved, the one my father maintained, the one they tried to steal, was mine again. I remember one quiet morning not long after Pratt had been tossed out, standing at the end of the gravel stretch, staring down its curve as the mist rose from the fields. The silence was perfect. No roaring engines, no squealing brakes, no smug waves from leather-seated SUVs. Just me, the crunch of gravel under my boots, and the distant call of a crow. I knelt down and pressed my hand against the stones, and in that moment, I swear I could feel my grandfather smiling down at me. The road was ours again, our blood, our sweat, our legacy. People sometimes ask, those few brave enough to come near me anymore, if I ever feel guilty, if I regret what I did. I can see it in their eyes, the unspoken questions they're too afraid to voice. Where did the cars go? Did you really do it? I let them wonder. I let them stew in that uncertainty, because the truth is, guilt is for men who doubt their choices. I never doubted mine. The HOA struck first. They nailed their signs into my ground, parked their cars on my gravel, issued their phony fines, and laughed while doing it. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd be the lone man crushed by the weight of their rules. But they forgot that I'm not the kind of man who bows. I'm the kind of man who digs his heels in and fights until there's nothing left standing in front of me. Do I miss the thrill of it? Sometimes. There was a certain rush in the nights I spent moving like a shadow, towing away those shiny vehicles while the neighborhood slept soundly. The pounding of my heart, the sweat dripping under my collar, the silence of the woods swallowing me whole. It was war, and war sharpens a man. But life isn't meant to be lived in a constant battle. Eventually, even a warrior needs rest. That's what the road has given me again. Rest, peace, and the satisfaction of knowing I fought for something worth protecting. The sheriff doesn't come around anymore. Maybe they grew tired of the dead ends. Or maybe Pratt's downfall killed their interest. Either way, I'm left alone, just the way I wanted. Sometimes a deputy will drive by, real slow, eyes scanning the tree lane like they're hoping to catch a glimpse of something unusual. I stand on my porch, coffee in hand, unbothered. They can look all they want. There's nothing to find, nothing they'd ever dare search for on my land without a warrant. And even if they did, the woods are deep, the pond is dark, and time has a way of bearing secrets. I still see the remnants of the HOA's arrogance when I walk past the rusted posts where their signs once stood. I leave them there on purpose, a reminder of the day they thought they could take from me without asking. A reminder of the war I won. Grass grows tall around them now, vines curling up the rusted bolts. Nature reclaims what man tries to control, and I find comfort in that. Just like I reclaim my road, nature reclaims everything in time. Some nights, when the moon is high and the woods are still, I walk out to the barn and open its creaking doors. The smell of old hay and rust fills my nose, and the beam of my flashlight cuts across the dust-coated windshields of their cars. There they sit, lined up like silent trophies, each one a monument to the battles I fought and the victories I earned. The Mercedes, the Lexus, the Range Rover, the Tesla, they all stare back at me like defeated soldiers in a prison camp. Sometimes I run my hand along their hoods, tracing the dust, remembering the nights I pulled them through mud and rain. They don't run anymore, their batteries long dead, their engine silent. But to me, they're alive. They speak without words, whispering reminders of what happens when men push too far. I know someday, maybe years from now, the land will swallow them whole. The barn will collapse, the forest will grow thicker, and the world will forget. But I won't. I'll remember every detail. The smug grin on Pratt's face when he first nailed a sign into my soil, the shriek of Janice when her Range Rover vanished, the red fury in Pratt's eyes when his Mercedes was gone, and the silence that followed their downfall. Those memories are etched into me as deep as the scars on my hands. And when I'm gone, when I join my father and grandfather in the earth, I hope whoever walks this road next feels the same fire I did. The fire to protect what's theirs, to fight when no one else will, to remind the world that some things cannot be taken without consequence. Because this road isn't just gravel and dirt, it's blood, history, defiance. It's proof that one man, armed with nothing but patience and resolve, can bring an entire empire to its knees. So no, I don't regret a damn thing. They took my road without asking, so I vanished every one of their cars. And if I had to do it again, I'd do it twice as hard, twice as fast, without losing a single night's sleep. Because at the end of it all, I'm still here. The road is still mine, and they're gone, forever.